The mystery of the wise men, an untold story. Who were they? The three figures who traveled through the dead of night, following a star no one else seemed to notice. They came from the east, outsiders, strangers, bearing gifts of immense value. But were they kings? Astronomers? Priests of an ancient faith? Or were they something even more mysterious? For centuries, their journey has been wrapped in legend, depicted in paintings, celebrated in Christmas traditions. But beyond the carols and nativity scenes lies a deeper mystery, one that challenges everything we think we know. These men risked everything, crossing treacherous deserts with no guarantee of success. They had no map, no written instructions, only a celestial sign guiding them to an unknown destination. What force drove them forward? What made them believe that a child, born in an obscure village, held the key to the destiny of the world? And the gifts they brought, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, why those specific treasures? Were they merely symbols of honor, or did they carry a prophetic message, one that even the wise men themselves may not have fully understood? But perhaps the greatest mystery of all is the star. What was it? A rare cosmic event? A supernatural phenomenon? Or something far beyond human comprehension? This is not just a story of three travelers, it's a story of faith, of sacrifice, of hidden truths buried in the sands of time. Tonight, we embark on a journey to uncover the real story of the wise men, their secrets, their struggles, and the divine encounter that changed history forever. The identity of the wise men, kings, priests, or something more. They are known as the wise men, the Magi, the three kings, but who were they really? The Bible never calls them kings. It never says there were three. It doesn't even tell us their names. The only thing we know for certain is this: they came from the east, following a star, searching for a newborn king. But why? Why would foreign dignitaries travel such a dangerous journey to pay homage to a child born in a land that was not their own? To uncover the truth, we must go back, hundreds of years before their journey ever began. The word Magi comes from the ancient Greek magoi, referring to a class of priests and scholars from Persia and Babylon. They were not mere fortune tellers or illusionists. These men were powerful advisors to kings, experts in astronomy, mathematics, and religious prophecy. The Magi traced their origins back to the ancient Persian Empire, where they served in the court of the great kings. But their influence didn't stop there. By the time of Jesus' birth, their presence had spread across Mesopotamia, where they studied the heavens, believing that the stars and planets could reveal divine messages. This wasn't mere superstition. In the ancient world, the sky was a celestial scroll, a map of destiny written by the gods. And when an unusual star appeared, they saw it as a sign of something earth-shattering. But why would pagan scholars be searching for a Jewish king? To answer this, we must look at one of the most mysterious figures in biblical history, Daniel. 6 centuries before the birth of Christ, the Jewish people were taken into captivity by Babylon, the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Among the captives was a young man named Daniel, who would rise to power in the very heart of Babylonian royalty. Daniel was no ordinary exile. He was given wisdom from God, interpreting dreams, deciphering visions, and revealing secrets that no one else could understand. His reputation became so great that King Nebuchadnezzar made him the chief of all the Magi. Think about that for a moment. A Jewish prophet, leading a council of pagan scholars. He had access to their greatest knowledge, and they had access to his. Daniel prophesied of a coming Messiah, a ruler who would establish an everlasting kingdom. He even gave a timeline for when this Messiah would appear, Daniel 9 verse 25. Is it possible that his teachings were passed down, preserved in the archives of the Magi, waiting for the moment when the sign in the heavens would appear? The wise men were not merely chasing a star, they were following a prophecy over 600 years in the making. We often picture the wise men as devout followers of the Jewish God, but the truth is more complex. The Magi came from lands steeped in Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest religions in the world. They believed in a supreme deity, a cosmic struggle between light and darkness, and the coming of a divine savior who would bring ultimate justice. Sound familiar? Though their beliefs were not identical to Judaism, the Magi were seekers of truth. And when they saw a celestial sign that matched the ancient prophecies, they knew this was no ordinary king, this was the King of Kings. They had wealth, status, and power. They didn't need to travel across deserts, endure the dangers of the road, or risk their lives confronting a tyrant like Herod. But they went anyway. Because some truths are worth the journey. Some kings are worth kneeling before. And some signs in the sky cannot be ignored. The wise men were more than just scholars. They were men of action, driven by a conviction that the world was about to change forever. What they didn't know was that their quest would set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of history. The Journey and the Star, a dangerous quest for the unknown. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, a vast, silent ocean of stars. But one star was different. One star called to them. It was brighter than the others, burning like a beacon in the heavens. And for the wise men, it wasn't just a celestial wonder. It was a sign. A message written across the fabric of the universe, summoning them to an unknown land, to an unknown child, one who would change the world forever. But following a star was no simple task. This was a journey unlike any other. A journey filled with danger, mystery, and the relentless pull of fate. To understand the full magnitude of what the wise men did, we must grasp one essential fact: they had no map. No written directions. No certainty of what lay ahead. All they had was the star, and the belief that it would lead them to the truth. From the lands of the east, perhaps Persia, Babylon, or even further, these men embarked on a trek that could have taken months. They would have faced the scorching heat of the day and the freezing cold of the night. They would have traveled across ruthless deserts, where bandits lurked in the shadows, waiting for unsuspecting travelers to rob and kill. And yet, they pressed on. Because something greater than fear drove them forward. Imagine the scene: a caravan of wealthy scholars, carrying gifts fit for royalty, moving slowly across the shifting sands. The rhythmic steps of camels, the flickering of torches in the darkness, and above them, the star, unblinking, unwavering, guiding them westward. But how? How could a single point of light in the sky lead them with such precision? What was the Star of Bethlehem? For centuries, scholars, astronomers, and theologians have debated this very question. Was it a rare astronomical event? Some believe it could have been a conjunction of planets, when Jupiter and Saturn aligned in a way that created an extraordinary brightness in the sky. Others suggest it could have been a supernova, an exploding star that would have appeared as a dazzling light for months. And then, there are those who believe the star was something far beyond the natural order, a divine phenomenon, a supernatural light that moved with purpose, leading the wise men to a precise location. The Bible gives us a clue: the star went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Matthew 2 verse 9, think about that. A normal star does not stop over a single house. A planet does not hover in the sky to mark a specific location. This was no ordinary light. Was it an angel? A manifestation of God's glory, like the pillar of fire that led the Israelites in the wilderness? Or was it something even more incomprehensible, something meant only for those who had the eyes to see? Whatever it was, one thing is certain: only the wise men followed it. Which raises an even bigger question. If the star was so remarkable, why weren't the people of Jerusalem, especially the religious leaders, searching for the newborn king? Why did it take foreigners to recognize the sign, while those who had the scriptures in their hands remained blind to the moment they had been waiting for? Perhaps it wasn't about seeing the star. Perhaps it was about recognizing it. The Magi had been studying the skies for generations, waiting for this exact moment. Their hearts were open. Their minds were searching. And when the sign appeared, they acted. Meanwhile, those in power, King Herod, the priests, the scribes, were too distracted, too preoccupied with their own ambitions to notice that history was unfolding right in front of them. The greatest event in human history was beginning. And most of the world had no idea. The wise men saw. And they followed. Not knowing what lay ahead. Not knowing how their journey would end. But certain that they were being led by something greater than themselves. And what they would find at the end of their journey would change everything. Arrival in Jerusalem, a dangerous inquiry. The wise men had traveled for weeks, perhaps months, across treacherous lands, following a single celestial sign. Their journey had been long, exhausting, and filled with danger. But now, at last, they had reached their destination. Or so they thought. As they entered the mighty city of Jerusalem, the heart of Jewish religious and political life, they expected to find celebration, joy, and the excitement of a kingdom welcoming its long-awaited king. Instead, they found silence. No banners. No gatherings. No recognition that anything significant had happened. The people of Jerusalem had no idea that their king had been born. And when the wise men asked their fateful question, they unknowingly set off a chain reaction that would change everything. They stood in the crowded streets, their foreign robes marking them as outsiders, their regal presence demanding attention. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? It was a simple question. But it was also the most dangerous question they could have asked. To those listening, their words carried a chilling implication. A king had been born. Not crowned. Born. This was no earthly ruler appointed by Rome, no political maneuver made by the Jewish elite. This was a divine event, an act of God himself. And there was only one man in Jerusalem who had everything to lose because of it. King Herod. Herod, a tyrant on the edge of madness. Herod the Great. A ruler feared by all, but trusted by none. A man so obsessed with power that he had killed his own wife, his sons, and anyone else who posed even the slightest threat to his throne. And now, these foreign visitors were standing in his city, speaking of a newborn king. A child who, if their words were true, had a greater right to the throne than he ever did. The moment the news reached Herod's palace, the Bible tells us, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Matthew 2 verse 3, disturbed. A word that does not fully capture the storm that erupted inside him. Herod's paranoia ran deeper than most men's fears. He had spent his entire reign crushing any possible challenge to his rule. But this was different. A prophecy come to life. A child born not by Rome's decree, not by human ambition, but by the will of heaven itself. Herod's mind began working. He could not afford to act recklessly. Not yet. Not with the eyes of Rome upon him. He needed information. So he devised a plan. Herod summoned the chief priests and teachers of the law, men who had dedicated their lives to studying the scriptures. Where is the Messiah supposed to be born? He demanded. They knew the answer immediately. In Bethlehem of Judea, they replied, quoting the ancient prophecy from Micah 5 verse 2, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." A prophecy. A direct confirmation that the wise men's inquiry was no foolish tale. But here's what's shocking, not one of the religious leaders acted on this revelation. Not one of them said, "If this is true, we must go and see this child at once." They had all the knowledge, all the scriptures, all the prophetic wisdom. And yet they did nothing. Because for them, prophecy was just an academic exercise. But for Herod? It was a declaration of war. Herod knew he couldn't openly oppose the wise men, not yet. They were respected, possibly even powerful, and he needed their cooperation. So he played the part of the gracious ruler. Under the cover of secrecy, he summoned the wise men to a private meeting. They stood before him, foreigners in a land of political intrigue, unaware of the monster that sat upon the throne. "Tell me," Herod said, his voice dripping with false curiosity. "When exactly did this star appear?" He listened carefully as they answered, calculating in his mind the age of the child. Then, with a carefully rehearsed smile, he said, "Go and search for the child. And when you find him, report back to me, so that I too may go and worship him." A lie. A deadly deception wrapped in the language of piety. The wise men had no reason to suspect his true intentions. They had spent their lives studying the stars, seeking wisdom, searching for truth. But they had never encountered a man like Herod. A man who would stop at nothing to protect his throne. And as they left the palace, unaware of the darkness looming behind them, they had no idea that they had just sealed the fate of every child in Bethlehem. The gifts and their meaning, symbols of a king, a god, and a sacrifice. The wise men had traveled across deserts, braved the dangers of the road, and stood face to face with a king capable of unthinkable cruelty. But now, at last, they had arrived. They stood at the entrance of a humble dwelling in Bethlehem, not a palace, not a fortress, but a simple home. Inside, they saw the child. Not a warrior. Not a ruler dressed in royal robes. Just a boy, cradled in his mother's arms. And in that moment, these men of wisdom, of knowledge, of power, fell to their knees. They bowed before him. And then, they presented their gifts. 3 treasures, carefully chosen. 3 symbols, whose meaning would only be fully understood years later, on a hill outside Jerusalem. Gold. The most valuable of metals. The symbol of royalty, power, and dominion. Throughout history, gold had been the mark of kingship. It adorned the crowns of rulers, the thrones of emperors, the treasures of mighty nations. By offering gold, the wise men were proclaiming something revolutionary. This child, this small, fragile boy, was a king. Not a future king. A king right now. His rule was not given by Rome. His power did not come from the sword. He was the King of Kings, the fulfillment of the ancient promise that a son of David would reign forever. But this king's crown would not be made of gold. It would be made of thorns. His throne would not be a palace. It would be a cross. And yet, even in suffering, he would rule over all. The second gift, frankincense. A substance burned in temples. A fragrance that rose toward the heavens, symbolizing prayers lifted to God. Frankincense was not a gift for an earthly king. It was a gift for a deity. The wise men, pagan scholars from a foreign land, were making an astonishing declaration: this child was more than human. He was divine. The promised Emmanuel, God with us. Frankincense signified worship. It was burned before the presence of God in the Jewish temple, a sacred offering. And now, it lay at the feet of a toddler in Bethlehem. Because this child was not just a teacher. Not just a prophet. He was God in the flesh. The third gift was the most mysterious. The most chilling. Myrrh. A precious resin, extracted from the wounded bark of a tree. It was used for medicine, for perfume, and for burial. Myrrh was an embalming spice, wrapped in the linens of the dead. A fragrance associated with the tomb. A strange gift for a child. Unless that child had come to die. Did the wise men understand? Did they know the weight of what they had placed before him? Perhaps not. But in their hands, they carried prophecy itself. Gold for a king. Frankincense for a god. Myrrh for a sacrifice. Did the wise men truly grasp the depth of their gifts? Perhaps they had a glimpse. Perhaps they sensed they were standing at the dawn of something greater than they could comprehend. But they could not have known how it would end. That the king they honored would be betrayed with a kiss. That the God they worshipped would be mocked and spat upon. That the child they knelt before would one day be wrapped in linen, with myrrh placed upon his body, laid in a borrowed tomb. And yet, his story would not end in death. Because this king would rise. This God would conquer. This sacrifice would save the world. And the gifts of the wise men would forever stand as a silent testimony. They had come searching for a king. And they had found a savior. The escape from Herod's wrath, a flight into the unknown. The wise men had completed their quest. They had followed the star, found the child, and offered their gifts. But their journey was not over. Because in the shadows of Jerusalem, a tyrant was waiting. King Herod, consumed by paranoia, was expecting their return. He had played the part of the pious ruler, pretending to share their reverence for the newborn king. But his true intentions had been far darker. He had no plans to worship the child. He had plans to eliminate him. The wise men had no idea that their visit to Herod had set a deadly plan in motion, until one fateful night, when everything changed. That night, as the wise men rested from their long journey, something interrupted their sleep. A dream. A voice, urgent, unmistakable, spoke to them in the stillness of the night. Do not return to Herod. Leave by another way. It was not merely a warning. It was a command. Something, or someone, was protecting the child. And the wise men listened. They had no reason to doubt Herod before. He had been warm, welcoming, even helpful. But now, they understood the truth. He was a liar. A predator. A man willing to destroy the innocent to protect his power. The next morning, they did not return to Jerusalem. They did not report back to Herod. Instead, they took an alternate route home, slipping away in silence, vanishing into the vast wilderness. Herod's web of control had been broken. But the danger was far from over. Because the king's rage was coming. Miles away, in the quiet of Bethlehem, Joseph also slept. Mary rested beside him, her arms wrapped around the sleeping infant, the child the wise men had worshipped, the child Herod wanted dead. Then, like a bolt of lightning piercing the night, a voice shattered the silence. Get up. Joseph awoke with a start. A figure stood before him, an angel, sent from God. Take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. The word sent a chill through him. Herod was coming. There was no time to hesitate. Joseph rose immediately. He shook Mary awake, urgency in his eyes. There was no time to explain, no time to gather belongings. The child, the Son of God himself, had to be taken far from here. They had to disappear. In the darkness of night, Joseph, Mary, and the infant Jesus fled. There was no royal escort, no protection, no certainty of what lay ahead. Only desperation. Behind them, Bethlehem lay still, unaware of the horror that would soon unfold. Herod's patience was gone. His fragile ego had shattered. And when he learned that the wise men had betrayed him, his fury ignited into an unspeakable atrocity. The order was given. The soldiers marched. Bethlehem would soon be bathed in blood. But by then, the child was already gone. Joseph and Mary pressed on, their path uncertain, their fear unshakable. But through the wilderness, through the danger, through the long, grueling miles, they clung to one unshakable truth: God was with them. And no king, not Herod, not Rome, not the powers of the world, could stop the plan that was already in motion. The king had come. And no force in history could take him away. The massacre of the innocents, Herod's final atrocity. The silence of the night was shattered by the sound of marching feet. Torches flickered in the streets of Bethlehem, casting long shadows against stone walls. Soldiers, clad in iron and leather, moved with brutal efficiency. Their orders were clear. Their mission, unquestionable. They had come for the children. The news hit like a dagger to Herod's chest. The wise men, his supposed allies, had betrayed him. They had vanished without a trace, slipping past his watchful eye, leaving him humiliated, exposed, and, most of all, powerless. The child they spoke of, the one they called the King of the Jews, was still alive. Somewhere. And if this child was who they claimed him to be, then Herod's throne was at risk. His legacy. His dynasty. His very existence. But Herod was no ordinary ruler. He was a man who had murdered his own wife and sons out of paranoia. A man who ordered the execution of friends, advisors, and anyone who might threaten his grip on power. And now, a baby had become his greatest fear. Herod would not take chances. If he could not find this so-called king, he would eliminate every possible candidate. And so, he gave the order. Kill them all. No one saw it coming. Bethlehem was a small village, quiet, unimportant. Its people lived simple lives, far removed from the political schemes of Jerusalem. Until the day the soldiers arrived. Doors were broken down. Mothers were torn from their children. Fathers fought, but swords cut them down. And then, the screams began. Infants, toddlers, innocent boys ripped from their mothers' arms, slain before their eyes. No mercy. No exceptions. The Bible does not tell us how many children perished that night. Some scholars estimate dozens, others say hundreds. However many it was too many. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. Matthew 2 verse 18, the prophecy of Jeremiah had come true. And Herod, in his blind arrogance, believed he had won. That he had killed the king before he could rise. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. The child was gone. It is one of the hardest questions to ask. If God knew this was coming, why didn't he stop it? Why did he warn Joseph to flee, but not the other parents? Why did so many innocent children have to die for the sake of one? It is a question that echoes through history, one that every generation has asked in the face of suffering. Why does God allow such pain? The truth is not easy to hear. God did not cause this evil. Herod did. It was not heaven's cruelty, but human wickedness that sent those soldiers into Bethlehem. God's plan was not to stop all suffering, but to enter into it. The child who escaped that night would one day grow up to carry the weight of every injustice, every sorrow, every crime committed by rulers like Herod. And he would not escape death forever. One day, years later, the same forces of corruption, power, and fear would hunt him down again. They would arrest him. They would beat him. They would nail him to a cross. And just as the mothers of Bethlehem wept for their children, his own mother would weep at his feet. But this time, death would not have the final word. Because this king, the true king, would rise. And his kingdom would never end. The return and final reflections. The king is gone, but the story is just beginning. For days, weeks, perhaps months, Joseph, Mary, and the infant Jesus lived as exiles in a foreign land. Egypt. A place once associated with slavery and oppression had now become their refuge. They were alone, far from family, far from home, waiting for a sign that it was safe to return. And then, one night, the angel appeared again. Get up. Take the child and his mother and go back to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to kill the child are dead. The tyrant was gone. Herod, the mad king who had slaughtered innocent children in a desperate attempt to hold on to power, was dead. But the world he left behind was still dangerous. Herod's death should have brought peace, but it did not. His kingdom fell into chaos, divided among his 3 sons, each more corrupt than the last. Joseph was afraid. Bethlehem, once a quiet village, was now under the rule of Herod's son, Archelaus, a man just as brutal as his father. And so, Guided once more by divine instruction, Joseph made a decision that would change history. He would not return to Bethlehem. Instead, he took Mary and Jesus north, away from the reach of Jerusalem's politics, away from the prying eyes of kings and rulers. To a place so small, so insignificant, so unremarkable, that no one would think to look for them there. Nazareth. A town with no reputation. A place where no great leaders had ever come from. A place that people would later mock, saying, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" John 1 verse 46, and yet, it was here, in the quiet, hidden corners of the world, that the greatest story of all time would unfold. And what of the wise men? What became of the travelers who followed the star, who knelt before the child, who defied a king? The Bible never tells us. Did they return home and resume their studies, forever changed by what they had seen? Did they tell their people of the newborn king? Did they live long enough to hear whispers of his miracles, of his death, of his resurrection? Or did they wait, until their final days, wondering? What became of the child? We do not know. But one thing is certain, the wise men did not simply bring gifts. They carried a message, one that still echoes today. A message that the world's true king had come. Not in palaces. Not with armies. But in the arms of a mother, in the humblest of places, surrounded by those who had the eyes to see him. And even now, centuries later, the question remains, would we have recognized him? Would we have followed the star? Or would we have missed the moment, just like the rest of the world did?